What would you say if I told you that the entire world of modern competitive sailing can be traced back to a single determined young woman who defied the odds? This is a story of her unlikely and for so long little-known victory, and how it eventually stripped away the nearly impossible barriers and unfair practices of her time, creating a form of the sport today that has become a pure test of tactical genius and redefined what it means to be a champion. And for me, this story is also personal. I'll share with you how my own experience where she was gave me an emotional connection and a hope that I see that she will continue to inspire others for generations to come. Perhaps if you stick this video out, you'll feel that hope too. To understand this story, we have to go back in time to yachting's beginnings with the rich, royal, and famous. The origins of yachting, as we would remotely recognize it, is often attributed to King Charles II of England, who picked up the sport and the word from his friends in the Netherlands, while he was in exile there during the period called the Protectorate. The sport began to flourish on his return to the throne. It became an exclusive pastime, but for only the royals and nobles, and was far more of a wagering event than of pure competition. By the latter part of the 19th century, the sport of yachting had grown, but it had a problem arising. It just didn't know it quite yet. Possibly with the advent of the America's Cup in 1851, the sport entered an era historians often called the Engineering Wars. Since this was a sport of the rich and famous, guess what happened? Victory was usually purchased through radical naval architecture and expensive experimental designs. The sport became the domain of monopolists like Sir Thomas Lipton, J.P. Morgan, and Cornelius Vanderbilt. Even at that level, though, there was a need for fairness to even make a competition worth having. One of the early attempts was called the Sewanaka Rule, and it tried to match boats only by their upright length of the waterline and their sail area. But the result was highly specialized, massive, overly canvassed, what even the press at the time called racing freaks, with large, dangerous overhangs and extremely narrow beams. The other yachts of that era were evolved small workboats dwarfed by huge sails called sandbaggers, where 10 to 12 gorilla-sized crew members would haul bags of gravel from one side to the other during tacks, and then on a downward leg would throw the bags, and themselves if needed, overboard in a desperate attempt to lighten the boat on its last leg to victory. That is, unless they capsized in the process. Does that sound fair? Many were saying it is out of control. The world was changing by this time. With the revival of the Olympic Games on the horizon, and the popularity of new team sports like baseball, football, cricket, there was a strong cultural pressure to include the sport into the growing middle-class society. If competitive sailing was to survive as a sport rather than a novelty, something needed to be done. But even in the first Olympic sailing events and the America's Cup in the first part of the 20th century, races were still on a handicap rating system that implemented a time over distance correction factor. This means someone could be behind and still win. There were still lots of ways the wallet still ruled the waves. One of the more famous rules at the time was the universal rule, as you see here. It's what the giant 120-foot J-boats came out of. Imagine in order to compete in sailing, we had to own a 120-foot J-boat. Was this going in the right direction? Would sailing end up like polo and jeu de paume as a discontinued Olympic sport? Something had to give, and it did in 1920, in my opinion. But first, if you like this content, can you hit that like and subscribe for me? I make these videos for none other than the love of the sport itself. And you clicking that really helps me to keep them going. And I hope you learn a little bit too, as I did in researching this. Thank you. In the America's Cup Challenge in 1920, under the universal rule, even when the British challenger Shamrock IV crossed the finish line ahead, the corrected time calculations frequently handed the victory to the American yacht Resolute. While there were yet years that the universal rule was still used, it was clear this manner of loss exemplified more than ever the overwhelming cost and an unavoidable unfairness inherent in the system. This influenced later moves, sometimes dictated by external reasons, such as the Great Depression and World War II, to go to a more economical plan. Not to be confused with cheap, however. And now at last what you've been waiting for. Time for the heroine of our video to enter center stage. The place? North Haven Island in Penobscot Bay, Maine, 1882. Even by this time, it was already a mixing place of year-round and summer vacation visitors who enjoyed informal sailboat races using a variety of working and pleasure boats. But because every boat was different, the outcome of the races was usually predictable based on the design of the boat. One of the summer residents, William Weld of Boston, raced the tender from his schooner yacht Gitana in 1883 but was soundly defeated. Time and time again. The tender was pretty slow and heavy, but William wasn't about to let that get in the way. So, in the off-season, he had the boat modified to make it faster, while retaining its practical character as a rowing and sailing dinghy. The redesigned boat won races the following summer, convincing others that it was worth a second look. But, rather than allowing each sailor to build an even faster boat from that, William's brother, Dr. Charles Weld, commissioned local boat builder James O. Brown to build several identical copies that would be a standard. The idea was simple, but revolutionary. Nobody had really done this before. And this wasn't monopolists just building massive behemoths. These were working-class people using the means and skills that they had on hand. Everyone would sail the same boat, so the winner would be determined primarily by sailing skill instead of the equipment. Imagine that concept. On August 15th, 1887, the island hosted what is regarded as the first day of one design racing that we know of. It happened to have all male sailors except for one young and timid but brave Ellen Hayward. I'll just call her Ellie. There were two races that day. First race of the day, legend has it that Ellen was slightly behind in the first race. One of the other Weld brothers got caught on a rock ledge, and she overtook him. On the second race, it's said that the brothers were caught up in a luffing match, which allowed Ellie to take the lead while they were distracted. But having sailed that bay myself, make no mistake, it was Ellen's skill in navigating the tricky tidal currents, avoiding the rocks, and masterfully performing the ballet with the wind that won her both races. Her inspiration and place in history were well deserved. Do I think Ellen's story had an effect on the sport? I think it's safe to say that it had a big influence on Boston, at least, through the influential Weld brothers. And that's pretty close to New York. And everyone knows that it can go anywhere from there, fast. Within a year, perhaps unrelated, but we'll never know, there was another one-design fleet, the Waterwag, that formed in Ireland. Which boat was the chicken and which the egg? It's hard to tell. Within a few years, there were so many other illustrious one-design boats. The Star, the thistle, the lightning, oh yeah, the laser. Eventually, both the America's Cup and the Olympics, and so many other local clubs that sprang up, adopted the one design format. I would like to think it was the inspiration from our Ellen who overcame the odds on that summer day of so long ago. Perhaps one of the most convincing clues to this fact is that the North Haven dinghy is still an active class, being built and sailed locally to this day. And there is still an annual regatta that celebrates it. You can even sail in this historic regatta. And there is another reason for me, a personal one. I was a sailing instructor for a famous Maine boat building school called the Landing School, still making small sailboats like the North Haven dinghy and the Water Wag today. It was just down from my house in Kennebunk. I would take the builder students, often new to sailing themselves, out of their new creations for their first sail. The boats they build are finely varnished and handcrafted masterpieces, very similar to Ellie's. I came to appreciate the skill and dedication to what it takes to build a wooden boat. It was my job to keep that dream alive, on the water, despite the rocky shores of the coast of Maine. The hours that we spent, builders and sailor, as we chatted, I came to understand the humbleness and incredible influence of Ellie's story and the James O. Brown builders of the North Haven dinghy. When I think of Ellie's story, I also think of what her inspiration has become. One design yacht racing is now a worldwide phenomenon, ranging from casual club races to the Olympics, Sail GP, America's Cup, and including highly prestigious and sought-after class championships. Is the resurgence of one design racing the very inspiration of skill over bill that little Ellie exemplified? To me, that is a resounding yes. Ellie, you are remembered and appreciated. May your inspiration live on for generations to come. Thank you, Ellie.